Welcome everybody. Let's start. Today, GIZ Fabric is hosting 3 speakers with expertise in fashion buying. And you might well ask, why are we doing something on fashion buying? My name is Stephen Frost. I'm your moderator today, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this online seminar on behalf of GIZ Fabric. So, why fashion buying? Well, it occurred to us some time ago as discussions on purchasing practices started to become much more common. One of the things we started to notice was people seem to have different ideas about what purchasing practices actually were. For some people, we discovered it was kind of a question of, have brands paid manufacturers for orders placed? And if they had, well, that was good purchasing practices, and if they hadn't, it was bad purchasing practices. And that's a way of thinking that originated from stories during, particularly before that, but yeah, particularly during 2020 and 2021, when, as we all know, some brands refused to pay for completed orders in countries like Cambodia and Bangladesh and Vietnam and elsewhere, or they demanded very steep discounts due to a range of uncertainties arising from the early days of COVID-19. Now, of course, there are much more sophisticated ideas about purchasing practices, but as we talked to more and more people, we realized that not very many people outside of the industry with direct experience in buying clothes really understood what a fashion buyer does. And what I mean by that is, what does a buyer actually do? What is the buyer responsible for? Who else is involved in making decisions on what to purchase? What challenges do they face? And so on and so forth. So one motivation for this online seminar is to hear from people with actual experience to talk about buying. So when we talk about purchasing practices, we have a solid foundation on which to build those kinds of conversations. The second motivation behind this event is GIZ Fabric, we definitely wanted to cover purchasing practices in this series, in this Moving the Needle series. But we didn't want to cover the same ground as other events have covered in the last 6 months or so. And one of the events I'm thinking of, and some of you might have been involved in this or attended, was the OECD Forum on Due Diligence in the Garment and Footwear Sector, which occurred in late February, so still fresh in our minds, where, if I'm not mistaken, there were 8 sessions on purchasing practices. So we wanted to get away a bit from, we didn't want to just cover what had most likely been covered in February in the OECD Forum, or in previous seminars over the last 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And those conversations have become quite well known. So we thought it would be useful to kind of get back and get everybody on the same page about, if we're going to talk about purchasing practices, we need to understand what purchasing is, right? So what do fashion buyers do? And the final reason why we're doing this topic, and I'll repeat this at the end of the day, that this is the first of 2 sessions on purchasing practices. So next month, on the 21st of April, we'll be running part 2. And part 2 is called Arbitration for Fair Purchasing Practices: the how, the who, and the how much. And in that seminar, we're going to be having a preliminary discussion about whether the fashion industry could develop an arbitration system to ensure fair purchasing practices. Now, when you think about arbitration, other industries do have arbitration systems. Thinking of the grocery retailers in the UK, for example. So we're going to discuss, we've got the speakers lined up, we've got 3 really great speakers lined up, and I can assure you that it's going to be a session really well worth attending. So this is something a preliminary discussion on an arbitration model. So that's in April. So before I get to introducing our speakers, just bear with me for a few minutes more while I go through the WebEx, the platform that we're all using. If you're familiar with Zoom, then you can use this, but just one thing in particular. I invite, if you want to, we're not telling you to do it, but if you'd like to, turn on your camera. If you do turn it on, you'll see a button in the top right-hand corner called Layout. That's a little grid. And I would suggest that you set your layout to stack or to side by side. And if you do that, then the speakers can see that they're not just talking into a black hole. There are actually people out there. And for those of us who teach at universities or do webinars or other sorts of things, it's good to know that we're not just talking to nobody. A few housekeeping issues. This event is recorded. It is being recorded, and the recording will be made available online. And if you've registered and you're in the session, you'll get an email with a link in about a week or so. Second, you are all, not the panel, but all the attendees are in listen-only mode. So if you do want to ask questions, then please type them into the comments box, and I will get to them. I get through most questions in each online seminar. We'll either deal with it in the Q&A session, or if I think the question is relevant to what we're talking about, I'll insert it into the discussion with the panelists. So please, put anything in the chat box. If you're directing it to a specific speaker, please indicate that, right? So I know if it's a specific question. Finally, we will have a short poll at the end of this event. It's a little survey, and there'll be a link that goes into the chat box as we get to the end of the event. And we would appreciate it very much if you could just take the time to click on that link and answer a very short survey there, because it helps us make these sessions more relevant and better and informative for you. All right, let's get on with things. Now to our panelists. Our first panelist is Jennifer Rule. Jennifer's a fashion lecturer at the South Metropolitan TAFE in Western Australia, the same place that I'm in as well. Jennifer's a digital design content expert in the fashion department at Perth's leading fashion design institution. She's previously worked as a designer and textile designer for companies including Pacific Brands, Design Works, Wholesale Fashion, servicing some of Australia's largest fashion retailers and designing for licensed brands like Mary-Kate and Ashley. And besides lecturing, Jennifer owns her own fashion retail business with her husband, for which she is the buyer, and does a little designing on the side. So a foot in both camps, in academia and in the business. Second is Anna Karen Dahlberg. Anna Karen is the Director of Sustainability at Lindex in Sweden. She's got an extensive background with the company. She started there around 20 years ago as an assistant buyer, and she's worked as an assortment manager and held various other positions, including being responsible for Lindex's production offices in China, India, and Hong Kong. So she's seen a lot of the business. And in recent years, she's successfully been driving the global sustainability work at Lindex, where she is now the Director of Sustainability. And third, Jessie Lee, a sustainability consultant. Jessie's in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. She's worked for a range of diverse parties across the fashion supply chain in China and Cambodia. And working for different parties in that supply chain has really developed a conviction for her that the relationships in the supply chain are very complex, and the people within those supply chain relationships are often misunderstood. She advocates for multiple stakeholder narratives and an industry with sustainability practices that are applicable and accessible for businesses of all sizes. So we've got a lot of experience here sitting on the panel, and I thank each one of the panelists for their time. Let me start with Jennifer. let me start with Jennifer. Jennifer's got a strong background in design, fashion business in general, with fashion business with her husband. She also teaches with a focus on design, but always often incorporating in class issues of fashion buying. So for you, Jennifer, my first question is, thinking about teaching and talking about fashion buying to students today in 2022, what does a fashion buyer do? Can you give us a kind of a big picture and what are the sorts of things that a student who was wanting to get into a company and become a buyer, what sorts of things are they looking at today?
Well, first of all is that one of the things that I teach, since I do all sorts of digital content, starting at the basics, I tell them they need to know Excel. Any good buyer needs some sort of thing, unless, of course, you're working in a really big company where you might have some other automated stock control kind of thing that's incorporated into it. But it's about knowing you're open to buy. And then it's a really big thing about being a buyer, which a lot of students, when they're studying fashion, they want their brands, their designs to pretty much echo who they are as an individual. And so it's really important that they learn that when someone's buying for a particular market, that's what you have to service. And there's a lot of things to consider beyond do you just like the design. It's is that colour going to work with that market? Is the sustainability, is the ethically things, are they factors that people are prepared to pay for? These are all things that everyone wants things to be ethical, but are they? Is that market, are they prepared to pay for it? For a lot of markets, yes. For others, no. Fair trade. When you're bringing things in, particularly from Asia, are the people producing these garments getting a living wage? And they're all part of the buying process of what is important. So I don't think you can design and not think about the end market and who is going to buy your product, because if you create a brand, you need a certain amount of, unless of course you're doing it as an artisan, you need a certain amount of production to make it viable. Otherwise the price point comes in really high and things like that. So that's a basic starting point with the buying. And also, the really important other thing with buying, and this is something I quote all the time in my classes, is that when I was in Melbourne and we would buy for, I've worked in wholesale fashion, so we would design, sorry, my phone's making beeping noises. We would design for Myers or Target or Sports Girl. If your product arrived a couple of days late, Myers or Target could get a discount. It was worked into their contract. And if you were a week late because you fluffed around making your design, changing your ideas on design and all those sorts of things, after a week they could cancel the order. And if the factory had produced it as you had requested, but it was your fault for fluffing around, it was you that got the cost of the production. So they are really important things to consider, that this is what buyers can do. They will have contracts that require your product to be delivered at a particular time. So this is normally when you're producing things, you have a critical path and you start from delivery and you work out how much time you have for each part of the process. So is that a good overview or do you want more?
I heard about asked me to write the system and then locked me out of the system. So I've only just come back on, but I'm sure your answer was fine. I'm very sorry for that, and we'll get onto WebEx asking why they would ask me to rate the system while I'm online. Anyway, that's enough about WebEx. Karen, Anna Karen, can I go straight to you, and we'll come back to you, Jennifer, as we go on. I want to ask you, you started, as I said in the introduction, you started with Lindex around 20 years ago as an assistant buyer. What's happened to buying in those 2 decades? And I mean, is today's buying, as kind of outlined by Jennifer, is that the same now? And how has buying evolved?
Yeah, I think listening to you, Jennifer, it's super interesting. And as you said, Stephen, I've been now. Of course, I've been with the same company for 20 years, so I can, basically more refer to how buying has evolved within Lindex. But what you're outlining here, Jennifer, is very much the way that we used to work. And 20 years ago, when I started, we had a very different set of different structure, where a lot of the power and decision-making power was lying with the buyer. The buyer had relationships with certain suppliers that they really liked. Orders were placed a lot based on that. Buyers had like favorite production markets that they liked. Buyers had also, we were not being very long-sighted in our planning. So basically orders were placed based on, monthly collections. And, buyers were working very much in silos, looking at, my own collection and my sales targets and buying targets and markups and markdowns. And, there are certain KPIs and so on, which is still the case. But over time, we have structured the processes a lot internally and lifted some decision-making power off the buyers. Because what happened, we have production offices in the markets where we produce. And 20 years ago when I started, and also 15 years ago when I was running the production office in China, the production offices served very much as middlemen or post offices for just basically forwarding the messages from the buyer to supplier. Like, now the buyer is asking us to do this, so now you have to do this, right? And that, being in my position or in our position, it frustrated us a lot. So we, started asking for more decision-making power being moved out to us as production people and being closer to the suppliers and supply chain. Because some of the messages that we sometimes had to convey to suppliers did not make sense. And suppliers were also very frustrated because they thought, there are no projections, there is no planning, I'm just working really ad hoc here. So, how can I serve you? So we would ask a lot for great service, right? But we would not give so much back. So over the time, this has really evolved, and we have sort of restructured everything. So we have given, on a strategic level, given certain decision-making power to buyers, but steering it more towards, buyers are responsible for assortment, planning the assortment, retail prices, sales plans, and so on and so forth. And our colleagues out in production, they take care of, supply chain, supplier management, which suppliers should we work with. Buyers can't go out and tell our colleagues in production that, please place this order with this supplier. Then our colleagues will say, it's not, you don't make that decision. You tell me what you want and I'll fix that for you. I think, answer to your question, Stephen, how the buying has evolved is, the decision making has been moved a lot from the buyer and being moved from personal relationships between buyer and supplier and very short-sighted planning to a much more strategic way of handling, the buying processes, if you'd like. And it's been driven mainly from, business needs from our side, cutting out waste, being more efficient, long-term planning, and, also keeping the suppliers in mind, but maybe 10 years ago we didn't extend those thoughts to the impact on the workers. But obviously, you know, when you start planning like this from your own, you know, it makes perfect business sense for us, then it also makes perfect business sense for suppliers, and it will ultimately have an impact on the workers also. So yeah, that's my first outline of this, and I'm sure we're going to come back to.
Well, how common do you think that the evolution that you've charted, how common do you think that is in the industry?
I think it's it might not be common practice. I don't think still. We have a lot. I mean, we talk a lot to colleagues, industry colleagues, and we sit in the middle of, you know, big networks driving sustainability together. And I would say that we have probably come quite far in this context. Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's common practice, but I would say that, you know, the evolution is going towards this anyways.
Jennifer, coming back to you, you know, listening to Anna Karen, what do you think of that evolution? Have you got any?
I think it made perfect sense, and it really made the old-fashioned way of it working sound really old-fashioned, right? Because I think what you ended up was with buyers having a lot of power that was really kind of a little corrupt in some ways, and hence not the best business model. So yeah, I loved what Anna had to say on that. I think it sounded like a really good strategic way of working. Yeah. Unless, of course, you're a small business like myself, where I'm a buyer for our business, where none of that actually happens because we're too small for any of that.
Yeah, I think that's really worthwhile reminding ourselves that a lot of players in the fashion industry are not big businesses. And well, Lindex may seem big, but there's plenty of players bigger than Lindex
Yes.
out there as well. And, you know, there's a scale from, you know, the very biggest right down to, you know, small companies like you and your husband run out of Perth. But even, you know, even your business is a global business. I think, you know, in the chat beforehand, you were talking about, you know, I think you mentioned Serbia at one stage, correct?
Yes, we're an agent for a Serbian fashion brand, and we have sub-agents throughout Australia that work for us. So we work closely with them. We normally go to Berlin Fashion Week for the launch of their brand, but obviously COVID over the last couple of years have put an end to that. But it's been really interesting to see how they've dealt with that, doing live video links of their launches so that the buyers can have a look at and have that whole discussion about the innovations to their new ranges and things like that.
Yeah, that's a whole different discussion, isn't it? The whole digitalization of the industry around you know, being able to still proceed with the business but doing it online. So coming back
and face to face though.
Yes, for sure.
Especially with that feel, you know, it's a texture thing, and
yeah, yes, it's hard to get past that. So Anna Karen, coming back to you, you know, you outlined that evolution, and you're talking about a 20-year period. So I'd like to do a little bit of crystal ball gazing, you know, and think about the future, and to ask you, what does the next 15 or 20 years look like for buying? Because we've seen, you know, your description, we've seen quite a bit happen in the last 20 years. What can we really realistically see in the next 15 or 20? And I know 20 years is a long way, but give it a shot.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. And, you know, I'd also like to say that, you know, if we look at our journey, 20 years ago, we didn't really want to work in a different way. I think we thought that was pretty good, you know. Then 15 years ago, we started moving out people to production offices. We started working differently with production offices, and then us managing production and production offices, we started flagging up like, hey, you know, the way we work is not, it's not a good way of working, right? So then it took a couple of years before, or maybe 5 years before, you know, before we started actually acting on that. But once, you know, we took the decision for real to actually make proper changes, you know, starting to work with business calendars that are market-based and based on suppliers' needs. We started working with empowering our production office colleagues. We, you know, once the decision was taken, the journey is not 20 years. So I think it's, I'd like to highlight that, you know, if once you make up your mind and you see the benefits of this, and, you know, you have the right top management to actually see the benefits and why we would like to work like that, the journey is not 20 years, it's maybe 5 years, you know, change management. So, and I think one thing that I would like to stress also is that like 6 years ago, we also started, you know, seriously setting our sustainability strategy, and in that, you know, this also made perfect sense, this way of working, you know, where we, you know, consolidated our supply chain. We have very close relationship with fewer suppliers. 10 years ago, we had 650 suppliers. Now we have 100, and 30 of them do 80% of our assortment globally. And I think, you know, in this whole strategic shift, you know, if we hadn't done this, we would not have been where we are today in terms of sustainable development. And, you know, we hadn't been able to drive our sustainability agenda. So asking me what the future beholds, I think, you know, looking at the legislation that is coming from EU, you know, New Zealand, UK, Japan, like this whole, you know, human rights due diligence legislation that is coming. Yeah. We have serious climate goals and reporting that need to be set and need to be delivered on. You can't do that with like with not having your buying practices and your strategic supplier management in place. I don't see how that is going to work. So I think this is my, you know, my viewing and my opinion, but I think that we might see a polarization. You know, you will have companies that work like we do, and you will have factories that can deliver to those buyers, and you will have workers that work for those factories that are much better off. You will have a set of suppliers and buyers and workers that are not so well off, because there will be markets that are buying from some markets that don't adhere to these, you know, new practices or these new reporting legislation, and they might continue to shop around and not have the strategic level of working. And then you will have a set of factories that cater for those brands and those markets, and workers who work for those factories. So I think that we will see both.
Yeah, that's an interesting evolution, and I think one of the interesting points I think you raise here is around legislation. I think over the last 25 years that I've been involved in looking at sustainability in supply chains, the last couple of years with the kind of rush of legislation has surprised me. And Norway, France, Germany's coming online, et cetera, and of course then the EU just released a draft a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of things happening out there around the law that buying is going to have to factor in.
And I mean, you're going to want to have a transparent supply chain, product traceability, and if you, I mean, in order to even reach that, you're going to need to work, you know, much more strategically with your buying practices, with your supply chain, with your supply management. And if you're a brand that haven't started that journey, I think you're going to be super busy and you're going to be struggling going ahead, I think.
So, if you think about traceability, if you think about compliance with new laws, new legislation popping up here, there, and everywhere, is that something then that where do buyers fit into that? What happens to buyers when are they thinking about all of these things, or are decisions related to those things made somewhere else in the company, and then buyers just how does that all work?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think if you just look at the legislation, it's I mean, it's putting quite a lot of pressure on corporate governance and having proper policies and frameworks in place. So, and those will obviously not be made by the buyers. They will be made in a different part of the organization, closer to the top management. Should be, anyways, in order to have credibility, and should not be made by buyers. And then, of course, those sets of policies or guidelines will have an impact on the way we do things, an impact on the way buyers do things as well, if that is not already being done. I would say.
I've got an issue. I've got an issue. Hang on. I've got a question. I've got a question from Alan in the chat box of something earlier. I think that you said, Anna Karen, is the production office independent of the brand, or is it just the brand's office here in Southeast Asia or Asia or wherever you're purchasing from?
Yeah, it's not independent. It's Lindex colleagues that are just located in a different country. So they are very much adhering to. I mean, they are us, right? It's the brand office employed by Lindex.
And then dealing with issues on the ground, right? Buyers are dealing with issues on the ground.
Exactly. So. Yeah, I think one of the evolutions I was just thinking about before this webinar, we used to have a lot of suppliers coming into our office, and every day you would walk in the corridors, there would be suppliers with suitcases and meeting buyers. For us, anyways, the personal relationship between brand and supplier is probably better than it used to be. But the suppliers are not meeting the buyers any longer. They're meeting our production office colleagues. They are the ones who,
Jennifer, have you got anything to add? If you're thinking about buying in the next 15 or 20 years, do you have anything to add to that? Do you see things similar, or do you see things differently?
I think it will evolve. Buying in general, I think it will change dramatically. To be honest, even in just like when we deal with something like our Serbian brand and we have our agents, well, to the fashion launch, we will actually invite some of our best customers, even though it's a wholesale event. We have customers that spend a lot of money on the brand, and we will invite them to the event because they feel like the inner circle, and it's a real treat for them perhaps, and they like to be part of it. And when they spend so much on a brand, it's good to do those kind of goodwill things. But in buying, like with this Serbian brand we have, they initially spent they're a big company, but not really that very big. And they spent like 40,000 euros on creating a wholesale app for buying. And it's magnificent. And I look at brands that are a lot bigger, like Desigual, and they will have on their website, they'll have a back end that you can go through, or you can go through an agent. And so we've seen the evolution of that. And then with small brands, you see platforms that host, and you can buy a space on that platform to host it. So it's like sending out line sheets, but you have a digital version that you can sell to boutiques. So if you're wanting to sell to smaller but lots of buyers and things like that. So I think technology is having a huge influence, and I think that a really interesting thing to look out for is you have brands like Clo, which is a digital software pattern making business, and they sell software which you can make your patterns on your computer, but you can also create an avatar of the garment, and you can actually have the avatar walking and modeling, and I can see that being very helpful as a selling tool to wholesale, because traditionally line sheets often just had a trade drawing. If you were big enough, you might have actually get some samples made, and then you could have a photo. But at the wholesale, at the selling to the buyer, they haven't gone into production at that stage. So it normally would be a drawing, whereas you can have these avatars. And so I think this will be a really big change on lots of different levels, and it will be because of buying in some instances, but that will go on, and that material will be used for marketing, and so it will be worth the value of the spend for developing it.
Yeah, we touched on this sort of technology in a previous online seminar 15 months ago, and one of the things that occurred to me and to GIZ Fabric as well was that Anna Karen talked about the rationalisation of their suppliers. They used to have 600 suppliers, and now they've got sort of 30 major suppliers. They've got other suppliers as well. They've got 30 major suppliers accounting for most of their product manufacturing. And one of the things I saw sort of early on in the COVID pandemic was companies, retailers and brands are going to increasingly expect producers, factories, manufacturers, to be more than just cut and sew factories, but to be able to provide a kind of a one-stop shop. Whereas once upon a time you took the order, you ordered all the fabric, the trims, you sewed it together, and then you shipped it off. But increasingly, the factories that are going to be producing for companies that are ahead of the curve in the future are going to have to add on extra services to that. Looking at design software, all sorts of things. Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead.
Like when I worked in Melbourne and I worked in wholesale fashion design, I'd work for a company that would supply to the majors. So whether it be Myers or Target, and let's just say someone like Target, when I would do a storyboard and I would design the fabric and everything like that, for every story, Target would put down about $250,000 on that order. And when they would do that, we were solely responsible for getting all of it produced to the quality. I expected the factory to make my fabric exactly how I wanted, the right weight, the right colours, my designs, my textile designs correct, and we would get the samples and we'd have the process. But it was at that stage that we would be responsible for making sure that the factories were ethical, that the labels were compliant with our country. That was really taken away from the buyers. The buyers didn't have that responsibility. We had all of that.
Yeah, nice point. Yeah, Jessie, can I come to you? Jessie, oh, hang on. Before I can just see a question's popped up here for me. And I guess it could be to Jennifer or to Anna Karen, but I think to Jennifer. Do you think increasing? I think Anna. Do you think increasing use of artificial intelligence in the fashion industry is going to change the buying practices of brands, such as increasing in offshoring, nearshoring, production, etc. Interesting question. Who wants to take a shot at that?
Well, I can take a shot. Yeah, I think I think that obviously one thing that the fashion industry is struggling with is creation of a lot of waste. One way of coming to terms with that is to look at production on demand. So gazing into the future, we might probably see more of that. AI certainly plays a role there. Because that would allow us to move production much closer to market. But I don't see that being 100% of the production. Could be a complement to some extent, maybe, or yeah.
Jennifer, do you want to jump in on anything before I go to Jessie?
Yeah, one of the things that I think with artificial intelligence, and one of the areas that's going to affect it, is with the prototyping stage. You can draft up your pattern on your computer. You can then model it, and you cut down all this waste, and then you may just prototype one final product. I've just been putting together a little Skillshare course on digital pattern making in Illustrator, just because a lot of people have this, and a lot of people that create these courses come from just a purely pattern making background, and so they don't have the depth of the knowledge of the program to really take it to where it goes. But the point of that is that you can create lots of patterns without wasting paper, and and I did a sample and it turned out perfect first go, which I was really relieved at. But it's I think there are environmental and green and white things that can go hand in hand with some of the artificial intelligence, whether it has a profound effect on the overall order, but hopefully things can be produced to be better cuts, better fits, and all of that, and hopefully therefore people just can't help but love those garments a little bit more, and hopefully they don't throw it away too soon.
Yeah, we just, we actually last year we have done a project where we have started creating models in 3D, so allowing for much less samples. We've cut samples by a lot actually, and we are planning to roll this out to more product groups. We started with the baby wear. Obviously that will have an impact on the suppliers. They don't have to produce as many samples. They don't have to wait for comments. We're not extending lead times. I mean, the whole process will be much more efficient that way, and cutting out waste, of course.
Yeah.
I think it's a fascinating area. I spend a lot of time looking at this, and I'm constantly surprised about what's happening. So Jessie, getting back to you. Sorry about that. You worked as a merchandiser in China before moving to other parts of the industry, and particularly in Cambodia, and in a factory, and you've seen the industry from many angles. And apart from that, I'm going to give a plug for your podcast with Kim. Jessie is the co-founder of a really excellent podcast called Manufactured. If you look up manufactured, as in the item was manufactured in a factory, Manufactured podcast, you find a lot of very interesting podcasts with manufacturers within the supply chain. So it's the only source that I can think of, not just podcasting, but it's the only source I can really think of where the supply chain voice is heard. Good, someone's just thank you, Wayne. Someone's just put manufacturedpodcast.com in the chat box. Put a link there to it if you want to go and have a look. I just want to promote that a bit because that podcast is, I think, a nice representation of the complexity and the idea that we often misunderstand the people in these complex value chains we sometimes take for granted. So yeah, and now Jesse, sustainability consultant, doing some journalism. We've got a good idea of everything, how it's connected, how sometimes it's not very well connected. And when you and I talked a couple of weeks ago, one of the things you mentioned was that there were 3 major parties involved in shaping purchasing or buying practices. Can you start off talking about what you meant by that? About the who are these 3 parties? What's going on there?
Yeah, sure. First, I'm very happy to be here to exchange the ideas and the thoughts with everyone. I also felt resonated a lot to what Jennifer shared and what Anna Karen shared just now. In fact, when you asked me the question, I remembered my experiences when I work as merchandising manager in a buying office for brands. In fact, that experiences now sounds like a hybrid of Jennifer's experiences and Anna Karen's experiences. It was a very stressful time. Lots of last-minute changes, price negotiations, lots of change, and very tight shipment window to catch up with. And at that moment, buyers and merchandising team, they belong to the same brand company. So like what Anna Karen shared just now, we all work for brands. So at that time, I thought buyers are the bad people because they are the one communicating on those very stressful topics. They are the one create these negative experiences of purchasing practices. But today I have very different viewpoint. So I think the first thing, behind the buying team, there are 3 dynamics shaped purchasing practices. The first one, I would say, is marketing strategy. Basically, it's a question about to whom we sell what at which speed. For instance, if we take H&M, the leading company as example, one of H&M marketing strategy is to urban people who are below 35, we sell high fashion and low prices items. So here, being fashion means being fast. You needed to be, half step faster to display your garment in the shops. And low prices means you have to place a large quantity to be profitable. And low prices also means you better outsource the production to a country with low labor cost, low, logistic cost as well. So you might use sea shipment. So here you see there is a conflict. Outsource production to a low labor cost country with sea shipment means a longer production time and shipping time. For instance, Cambodia. From importing the fabric to the factory until the products shipped by boat arrive at the store, it can take 3 to 6 months. It depends. So low prices here, low cost, low shipping cost, and everything conflict with the requirement of being fashion. So what you do? That naturally you want to keep the flexibility for yourself. You want to make as many last-minute changes as possible, and that naturally creates a quite stressful purchasing experiences, like low labor cost, low raw material cost, lots of unpredictable changes to production at the last minute, tight shipment to catch up, and so on and so on. Of course, if you have a long-term relationship built up with the suppliers, you can avoid those hassle. You can make it as small as possible. But we have to say there are a lot of brands for all sorts of reasons. They didn't have this relationship with their suppliers. Then if the marketing strategy is to sell, let's say, high fashion, low prices, then unavoidably the purchasing practice, the buyers would have to focus on how to lower the cost on each step, and how to circulate the production as fast as it can. And the tension comes between low labor cost, lots of changes, unpredictable changes, and fast circulation of the whole product life. So I would say marketing strategy is really the first dynamic. And second one, I think is maybe a bit surprising, is a finance team. And I see that when I heard Anna Karen shared about climate change and in future, in the coming 5 to 10 years, especially with the recent released IPCC report, the situation is very, very critical. And there are lots of legislation might be set up. So with all this, I think there is a challenge, interesting challenge to finance team of big brands and big suppliers, which is how are you going to calculate your cost and margin? For instance, let's make an example. You sell $5 t-shirt at 1 million pieces. That will generate a revenue of $5 million. And you sell $10 organic cotton t-shirt at 500,000 pieces, you will have a revenue as $5 million. So the revenue are the same, but your profits are different because the organic cotton is much more expensive than the basic t-shirt. Of course, you will say organic cotton t-shirt also sell more expensive. However, the quantities are very different here. As what Jennifer mentioned just now, some markets are not ready to take the more ethical or more sustainable products. So in this case, the level, the scale of sales will never be the same. The organic cotton t-shirt would have less consumers than the other one. I think the thing here is, of course, this is not a problem for a new brand. But imagine an established company and listed company, for instance, H&M and some very big suppliers. They are listed companies, they already established for years and years. So if H&M, let's just imagine, if H&M at this moment want to transfer all the basic items to organic items, then the financial report will not be as good as before to its stockholders, because the material cost is very different, because the sales quantity would be very different. And so it seems like a dead end. There is no way out. But I have a friend give me a very good idea. He said, then it means the company has to redefine cost and profits. So imagine if you can put environmental damage in your cost sheet, then your basic items would be more expensive than organic items. On the other side, if you can put sustainability achievement, transfer it into your profit sheet, then your organic items will have a much better financial performance in this case. So I guess what I want to say is the connection between the finance team, the definition of cost and profits, the connection between this and the purchasing practice is, if we still follow the old way of cost profit calculation, very mechanic, like labor cost, material cost, shipping cost, and profit. If we follow this old way of cost profit calculation, purchasing practice buying team would never focus on eco-friendly items or more sustainable items, because there is a bar over there preventing them. But if we can change the way of how we calculate cost and profits, the signal will be released that each loop of the supply chain will start to move. And from designers to buyers to producers, we'll all look at more sustainable items. Sustainability will be highlighted. So I think finance here is really the key to redefine cost and profit. What is cost? As for the third dynamic, I think that's probably familiar for some people here today, and that is sustainability engineering team. As I know, for some suppliers or some brands, they have this team. Basically, they work together to set up carbon emission targets of the year, or sometimes it's a top-down task from brands to its suppliers. Sometimes it's agreement on carbon emission, or sometimes they figure out a way to shift energy to a greener one, something like that. And from what I heard, that in some companies, for some brands, the sustainability engineering team will score all the suppliers and then share this data with the buying team. Then the buyers have responsibility to place a certain percentage of orders to the top scored suppliers. This is very interesting because in this way, it shows sustainability team in a way directly influence on buying choices, on purchasing choices. And in a way, the buyers have to respond to that by placing a certain percentage of orders to those top scored suppliers. That sounds like the brands are financially subsidized suppliers who are more sustainable or who find more sustainable practices. So from that point, I would say this seems is a new thing pop up in the last 10 years, which is also a strong dynamic behind the buying team to shape a more relaxed or more sustainable purchasing practices. So basically, these are the three dynamics I think shaped telling the story about purchasing practice. It's not just about buying, it's about how you market the brand and how you calculate your cost and profit, and how you financially support or financially reward the suppliers who proactively looking for sustainability solutions. So.
Thanks, Jessie. So if you think about these three, this is very complicated, okay? But if you think about these three streams that you're talking about, what's changed there over the time you've been in the industry? You know, you're working as a buyer, then you moved out of Cambodia. Do you see? Karen talked about the evolution before, and Jennifer talked a bit about this too. I mean, do you see things changing within these three streams over the time you've been making these observations?
That's a very good question. My first feeling is, as Anna-Karen shared, the decision power used to give to buyers now seems scattered, now seems shared by other parties from the company. So the buying power on buyers' hands are less centralized now. That's the first thing I think happened already. As for sustainability, that's another thing I see it as a new change. Before, it's rare to hear that, it's rare to know that the suppliers could propose some more eco-friendly materials or more sustainable solutions which get adopted by brands, because it's always cost-oriented. But today, with this sustainability engineering team located in both brand side and supplier side, seems this becomes more and more the trend, or more and more the right way of doing things.
Alan's got a question in the chat box for you, Jessie. You mentioned something about brands would subsidize producers who are more sustainable. But Alan's saying, why would a brand want to subsidize a producer who's more sustainable, since that lowers profits, shareholders are unhappy, or owners are unhappy? Why would a brand want to subsidize a producer for being more sustainable?
That's very interesting. Yes. this is the point I think I missed just now. When we talk about all those hassles in the negative purchasing practices, the very important thing is those experiences actually don't, they don't necessarily bring down your costs. The bad communication with the suppliers or kind of negative relationship or conflicted relationship with suppliers don't necessarily bring down the cost, because buyers or brands, they can't know everything. They can't predict what will happen. Without a partnership, it's hard to make a decision that answers all the challenges or fits all the situation. So why would a buyer, why would a brand subsidize the supplier? One practical answer is they can gain much faster lead time. This is one practical answer. By share some finance risks, suppliers would be happy to buy fabrics much more in advance. That means suppliers will pay the money first and expect to get paid after. And this needs trust. Without trust, without a real partnership, no one would do that. So if brands could share some of the finance risks, then the practical benefits it gets is a faster lead time. And another practical benefit is a lighter inventory, because the supplier could manage sort of inventory on the supplier side, could report to the buyers to say, we still have this much fabric at this volume. Maybe you don't want to place more quantity of this one. So that's the two practical goods I can think about now.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. And Karen, does this resonate with you, what Jessie's talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Although I would probably not. What you're referring to Jessie as marketing strategy is, for me, the whole business model. It's like the personality of the brand, like and this is also something that we are discussing a lot internally, because it's like exactly what you're saying, Jessie. We are the same kind of model, right? And we have a growth plan for 2030, because we are a for-profit company. But at the same time, we're going to reduce our climate emissions by 50% until 2030. So you can imagine the scale of that challenge. And while also obviously still living up to ethical purchasing practices, working with living wages and management systems in suppliers, and gender equality programs, and I mean what have you. So there is a dynamic here between the business model and what we are, how we buy, what we buy, and also the sustainability strategy. So these three components are definitely interesting. But what I would like to highlight here also in this discussion is that sustainability is no longer just a nice to have, because it's very much related to business risk. It's about future-proofing your business. It's not about just working with the suppliers that are a little bit more sustainable, or because our customers expect that, or so on and so forth. Again, now I'd like to refer to the regulations that are coming now, and the industry that we are in, the business that we are doing, will be like more expensive to do, if you will. We will be subjected to extended producer responsibilities. We will be subjected to other taxes. There might be a carbon dioxide tax coming up. We don't know what will happen. So in your profit and loss calculation there, Jessie, all of these things need to be accounted for. So it's not only about going to buy organic t-shirts, it's actually about remodeling the whole business in order to future-proof it, in order to deliver on the climate targets, in order to deliver on being able to make these investments. And coming back to your scorecard, we do exactly that. We have a scorecard where we score our suppliers on a set of criteria which are both related to business and sustainability targets, where sustainability is weighing pretty heavily. And orders will go to the suppliers who deliver on all these criteria. But it's not only about, you know, nice to have, it's about future-proofing our business. And I think this is so important to highlight. So the profit and loss calculation, I agree with you there. We spend a lot of time on that internally now. We are like modeling our future, you know, given our business model, what we are, who we are, how we buy and how we sell. Given our climate targets and our growth plan, you know, what does this model look like? Like, how do we change the pieces of the puzzle? And so it definitely resonates.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I have a response to that. I heard you say future is going to be more expensive than now, and I heard expensive. And then a funny question pop up is it expensive for all the brands in all the markets, or is it just expensive for some brands in some markets? You know, like what we discussed just now. If at the same time it's expensive for everyone, then it's not really a problem, because if we all transfer environmental cost or damage, or if we all transfer sustainability consideration into our cost and profit sheet, then it's not really a problem, because it's same for everyone, let's say this way. But if it's just expensive in some markets for some brands and not in another market, in some other markets or for some other brands, then it could be a problem. Then I say the future is a bit dark, because you are right. Then with climate change, energy would be more expensive, raw materials will be more expensive, transportation will be much less predictable. All this are just increasing the cost of production and shipping a lot. Yep. So yes, from that point, if more and more markets are not ready to take, or not anymore to take, more sustainable products, then yes, it will be more expensive for some brands, but not for others.
Yeah, but I think, Jessie, I think, Jessie, that, you know, if you look at, like we were talking about this just yesterday internally about, you know, raw material risk. Of course, it's a huge issue, right? But looking at what's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now, oil prices are hiking, which means polyester prices are going to hike, right? So virgin polyester will go up, and it will have an impact on the other raw material market or other raw materials as well, right? So it could have an impact that it would actually accelerate recycling innovation. We can hope.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I hope so. And I hope the recycling business would use less energy, because energy would become a problem too. And also, yes, climate change will directly impact on cotton production. So in fact, the challenge comes in all the directions. I say it in this way, yeah. So and then business models, business models resetting or reviewing becomes very important at this moment.
Yeah, it is important, and it's also important to sort of remodel your supply chain, because you're going to need traceability. You're going to need to start. You know, historically we have been buying garments. We go to a garment supplier, we ask them to get us what we want, right? But we see increasingly we're going to have to go directly to raw material, trace that and push that up our supply chain. So we need to have, you know, a consolidated like partnership supply chain where we get transparency and traceability, because raw material will be so related to risk. And so it's we're going into a totally different future.
I have an interesting question for you. For a while, I heard many people advocating on Instagram, on other social media platforms, saying consume less, or not buying is the thing we really need to do now. And recently I saw a post from a European organization, I forgot the name, sorry for now, to make a suggestion, suggest to European people to say, with the new climate, with the future of new climate change, urban people should buy per year no more than 3 garments, no more than 3 clothes. So when I think about that, and especially I work in garment sector, my feeling is, if you are a brand, I mean, how are we going to face this kind of public attention or this kind of trend? Or because if one brand decided to shrink the market shares will not just leave there, other brands will take it. So I think there are 2 levels of questions to be answered. One level is the sustainability level. One level is the idea level. Is that true? Is that right? My personal answer is yes, of course, we need to consume less. But one level is the very practical business level, which is if we supply less or we produce less, but then will the market maintain a smaller size, or it will expand still unlimited because maybe others will not take the same action. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, we think about this all days. I can tell you. Yeah, I mean, this is a bit cliche, but I think it's also, I mean, there is a real big level of truth in it, and we have to relate to this. Like, how do we create value in business from something without extracting so much new raw material and without having such a big climate impact, while also obviously we have to think about the workers, you know, that are producing all these garments and that are provided with a job as well. I think, I mean, if you look at the future, I think some of the workforce must be shifted to the sales markets, because we are going to have to make money from secondhand and resell. We just are. There is, I mean, I don't see how we cannot do that. I think, you know, the raw material costs and the carbon dioxide taxes and so they will be there. Extended
or repair.
I mean,
yeah.
And you know, you see it a lot already in. I think different parts of the world are different levels of maturity, right? So you see it a lot in Europe, and EU is really front running in this when they are crafting now a textile strategy which will regulate everything we do, how we design a product, how we talk about it, how we market it, how we take care of our waste after usage. I mean, there is like an avalanche of regulations coming our way in Europe, and I think our biggest worry is that you know, a lot of companies, a lot of competitors that we talk to, and in our networks, we are all very positive to this legislation because we think, you know, it will create a level playing field, and it might also spur innovation and research and development. But we are worried about non-EU companies like this, you know, Shein and Wish and all that. Are they going to be able to just, you know, offload all these garments onto our markets unregulated? I think that is our biggest worry. So
that's a topic for another webinar.
Yeah, another topic.
It's very interesting. I love the conversation. I could go on like this for some time, but I'm gonna hit a few questions that have come up in the chat box while we've been talking here. But before we get to them, I'd just like to remind everybody to you know, if you could fill in our survey, we've got a link in the chat box. So look in the chat box. The IT team has just put a link there to our survey. If you could do that, please do it. It does help us. We're just talking about the EU, and Karen, you're just talking about EU legislation, rules, regulations that are popping up. There's a question, it's an interesting question here that relates into that from Juliana in the chat box. Does the EU taxonomy affect the fashion industry somehow? And for those of you not familiar with this, EU taxonomy is a classification system establishing a list of environmentally sustainable economic activities could play an important role for the EU to scale up sustainable investment and implementation of the European Green Deal. And Karen, you got anything to say on the EU taxonomy, or do you think you've kind of covered that?
Yeah, we are not directly subjected to the taxonomy right now. We are not one of the targeted areas, if you will. But I mean, we expect that we will be, because if we look at this corporate human rights due diligence legislation, for example, in all other legislations, the textile industry is identified as one of the problem areas. So when it comes to that, the other legislation, which is for companies that have more than 500 employees, but there are certain targeted problem areas where it goes down to companies that have 250 employees. Textiles is one of those, textiles and fashion. So I mean, we can only expect that we will be subjected eventually.
Yes, I agree. To Jesse, I've got a question. Sorry, I'll go on and get a few more questions out of the way. Tamim has asked a question to Jesse about something that you talked about before, and Karen, you might have something to say about this too. I mean, how effective and truly representative is the process by which suppliers are judged on their level of sustainability? To what extent does this process cover the sustainability of suppliers producing for you? So how representative is this process of scoring suppliers on sustainability?
Well, for us, it's it has a total impact on the choice of suppliers, and it's sustainability from a holistic perspective. We look at both social and environmental scores, and we are now starting to score our fabric mills as well on environmental performance, because that's where the heavier impact is on water, chemicals, and emissions, climate emissions. So yeah, for us, it's we don't work with suppliers at all that don't perform. But obviously, if our big partner suppliers, we don't just walk away without having a proper assessment and discussion on why are they not performing, what are the issues, and so on. We don't just leave. But if there is no performance in a period of time, then we have to take the discussion that we're not sharing the same values of the future. We can't work together then.
Jesse?
That is also what I heard and what I understand. Yeah, it's assessment from both environmental sustainability and social sustainability, and it's not like a one step or survey. It's more like assessment and discussing and come together to have a goal, and if not achieved, then why. And it's more like rolling process, and in the end, in a given time, usually it's 1 year or sometime both sides agreed, they are going to have a result, and that result we simplify it as a score. But basically, it's evaluation of lots of factors and a result of assessment. It's not single oriented. It's not a top down, grading something.
Jennifer, can I circle back to you? Because you wrote something in the chat box which intrigued me and resonates with me. I taught at a university in Hong Kong for over 20 years, teaching sustainability, and I saw a great shift over 20 years. I was teaching in a business school. I saw a great shift over 20 years in Hong Kong amongst students of a greater willingness to take sustainability more seriously. And Jennifer wrote in the chat box 20 minutes ago, the next generation are looking good. A huge amount of our students, so she's talking about her students in Perth at the Fashion Institute. A large amount of our students are very keen to produce garments using zero waste pattern techniques and I guess other things as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? The student, because the students you're teaching today in 2022 are going to be in Anna Karen's job in 20 years' time. So what are we to expect? I mean, tell us a bit about that.
Well, particularly at our institution, and I think a good percentage of it could be because there's that general shift, but one of our head lecturers just did her master's in fashion greenwashing, and
Right.
and she is a senior pattern making lecturer. And so she is always exposing the students to things like zero waste. She's very much into that Miyake kind of look anyway. And so with that, we've actually, over the years, particularly in the last few years, we end up with a certain percentage of students which fully embrace it. And it just becomes increasingly so that even people that are not so keen that that's not going to be their main thing, they still want to have a go at it. And they're very aware of soft dyes that are environmental. Also very aware that digital printing, you're going to get less waste of water. There's a lot of things that we consider when we're teaching all of these things. And the students are overwhelmingly, they want to be doing the right thing. And I think, fashion has a bad name for what's out there, but there's, in my little pocket of the world, my fashion students are designing wonderful and amazing things, but they're really embracing very sustainable practices. Some aren't, as you would expect, but
Yes,
amazingly,
yes.
a lot are.
Yes. Yeah, and that resonates with what I found. I wasn't teaching at a fashion school, but teaching business students sustainability. 20 years ago, I think in Hong Kong Business School, no one would have taken that seriously. Last year I finished up in Hong Kong my last semester. The shift. I was thinking about the shift over the years was dramatic. I mean, Anna Karen, do you see that? Do you see that with people coming into Lindex, into your company? Are young buyers today a different breed than buyers 20 or 30 years ago?
Absolutely, and we have a very close relationship with the Textile University here in Sweden, which I also attended 25 years ago. And I'm also in one of the in an advisory board for some of the programs in that school. And sustainability is just a very natural part of all the programs in that school now. We also get, every week, we get requests from students who'd like to write their thesis for us. And they want to do reports, and they want to have internships, and they want to, work with, changing the industry. There's such a big drive out there.
That's great.
Yeah, things are definitely changing. We're getting towards the end here, but I've got a question from Mark in the chat box. I guess to Anna Karen, really. Do you see a real impact of the new German due diligence law in Asia?
Sorry, say again. If I see a.
Do you think that the German due diligence law will have a real impact in Asia? Down on the ground amongst suppliers.
Yeah, I think that is the key question. I mean,
right.
The legislation is obviously shaped because the ambition is to drive some kind of positive change, right? But we should also be aware that it's an EU directive that is free to interpret by every country. You know, we have also been in other processes around chemical taxes and so on that have been on the table, where the will to drive change and have a positive impact is good, but the actual formulation of the legislation finally lacks any kind of impact and only causes administration. So there is always a worry, I think, that this will be a reporting legislation that will not drive any change or have any positive impact on the ground, obviously. You know, companies are different. We tend to want to do things for real and do things that, you know, report on things that we do actually and spend more time on doing than saying. Not everybody is like that. And I know there is the whole round of what is that, like oh, I lost the word. You know, there's like an input round from different stakeholders on this
consultation
round. It's going on right now, and I know the human rights people, they are not happy that this legislation is not subjected to the SMEs. And it actually targets only 1% of EU companies in the end.
Right.
So yeah, I suppose it might have an impact in Asia. It might not. Let's see.
Yes, that's also a topic for another webinar. What these, because there is a lot of criticism about these, whether it's the German law, whether it's the EU draft that's come out. There's a lot of criticism from the NGO community, from worker rights groups like Clean Clothes Campaign, from etc. It's human rights groups about whether these things will have an impact. And I think we have, time will tell. We have to wait and see. But let's see. We've got about 4 minutes left, and so I'd just like to remind everybody to fill in the survey if you can. The link is in the webinar. I'd like to thank our 3 panelists for a discussion that I certainly enjoyed, and I hope the people on the listening in also got something out of it. I spend a lot of my time over the last 2 decades plus having these conversations, and I find them endlessly interesting. So thank you very much for your time and effort putting into this. And I hope everybody on the call will join with me in a bit of virtual applause for our three panelists. Just a reminder that on the 21st of, let's double check here, 21st of April, we'll be having a follow-up to this, a very different conversation, but a follow-up on purchasing practices. Today we talked about buying, but that's kind of from the buyer side. But on the 21st of April, we'll be really looking at things from the supplier side, from the manufacturing side, and thinking about arbitration. So if a supplier is not paid for goods produced, as happened more so under the pandemic, what could arbitration be a way of recourse for suppliers, and could there be an industry arbitration model that could fit for that? That's it. We've got 2 minutes left here. I'm just going to wrap up. On behalf of GIZ Fabric, I would like to thank all of you for dialing in and for staying on. We do value your support. And okay, Jennifer, very quickly. Jennifer said, can I add one more thing about buying? Very quickly, Jennifer.
Just one of the things I wanted to add about buying is the one thing that people don't know about buying is the exchange rates. You actually have to understand finance in that when you buy something, that might not be when you're paying. So you have to sort of almost hedge your finances. And sometimes in big companies, you actually do use hedge financing to pay for your buying. And that it's a big topic, but something that people don't realise, that you actually have to deal with finance in that hedging.
Yes. I run a business doing that sort of stuff too. I know all about that. Yes,
One.
I agree. So I'd like to thank all of you for dialing in, staying on. We value your support. Thanks again to our panelists, without whom none of this would be possible. That's all from me until next time. Take care and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Nice conversation.
Thanks. Nice.
Yeah, everyone. Really, yeah, great stuff. Thank you all. We'll be in contact with all of you after this. But really, great discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.